All right, welcome everyone to our May TMN Tuesday. We have a very exciting one today, turning fieldwork into funded projects, grant strategies for TMN chapters. We have Arlene Siller from Ascend Nonprofit and Business Solutions here with us today, and we're going to quickly go through our intro slides so we can give her as much of our undivided attention as possible. So this is just the monthly reminder to that we will be recording this and adding it to our TMN Tuesday page. You can use that QR code there, or someone will drop the link in the chat for you. But we have a WebEx help guide if you're having any issues with WebEx on that page as well. As a reminder, you cannot share your video or audio for this webinar, but you can use the chat function. So any questions that you have throughout the webinar, feel free to drop those into the chat, and we will ask those of Arlene at the end of her presentation. Please be mindful of grammar and spelling as you're doing so we can make sure that we get your question across properly. This will last for about 1 hour and can count for an hour of advanced training. And as a reminder, again, the recording will be posted to the website either later today or tomorrow. So if you have to bow out early or know someone who's missing it today, you can get that link to them from our website. Just another reminder that to help support events like this, please fill out this survey. For the location, just put in whatever county you are watching from. But it's short, it's voluntary, and it's just a way to track some of the number of people who are here, and again, to help support events like this in the future. Then with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Arlene. Again, she is with Ascend Nonprofit and Business Solutions. She's the CEO and founder. I don't know why my slide jumped to the last one. Let me go back. There we go. And she's going to talk to us about grant strategy. So Arlene, take it away.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here with all of you. I'm going to go ahead and start to share my slide deck. And just let me know when you can see it. Give me a thumbs up. No,
You
can't
jumped
see
off
it.
for just a second. I don't see it yet.
Make her presenter.
You should be. Let me try again.
All right. Oh, it says I'm no longer the presenter.
Try again now.
Okay.
There.
Yes. All right, great. So again, thank you for having me here today. We are going to be talking about the fieldwork that you do and turning it into fundable projects and what that looks like from a funder's perspective. So again, my name is Dr. Arlene Siller. We are a company that does grant research, writing, and compliance, in addition to lots of training with things like this. Since 2019, we've raised $188 million for various nonprofits, government, and education institutions. But in addition to being a 30-year grant writing veteran, one of the things I did, and I'm sure for those of you who have written grants, you've probably had a very similar experience where you write a fantastic grant that gets funded, you submit something similar. We never use a cookie cutter approach, but we submit something similar in terms of that project to another funder and get denied, and not really understanding why that happens. And that can be very, very frustrating. So one of the other things that I did in addition to being a grant writer was I wanted to really learn about what happens on the review side. So I became a reviewer. It's a formal process that you go through. And with that, I have done reviews at the federal level, at the state level, and then also for corporations and foundations. And so that experience was just so eye-opening in terms of what happens after you hit submit, because I think for those of us that are on the fundraising side or trying to get just our programs funded, maybe we're not a typical fundraiser, but we're in the programming side, is we're focused on the day that the grant is due, right? And so all of this work is going toward that. We hit submit, and there's this great feeling that you have with that, but what happens after? And so learning this review process is really where we come from in terms of our grant writing. And so that's the perspective that I'm going to take here with you today. So one of the things I like to do is just check in, see how you're doing. And since you kind of operate in this space, I thought we'd see how you doing. So let us know in the chat how you're feeling, which owl kind of represents you. I like to stay away from like 3s and 8s kind of, and hopefully I can turn things around and you find this interesting. But thank you for all of you who are chiming in. I love that. So, you guys are already doing fundable work, and that's not the challenge in terms of the project itself, but it's really how you're translating the work that you do in that project into fundable language that resonates with the funder. And so in this review process, it basically, in general, every funder is different. So if you've heard the phrase, if you've met one funder, you've met one funder, that absolutely is true. That's true on the grant side of the actual application, the way in which you submit that grant application, the way in which they do or do not want to have, that kind of close relationship with you. And then it's also true in terms of how they do a review. But in general, if I had to break it down into 3 steps, the first part of the review is called the technical review. And that's just, did you follow all the rules? Submitted on time, number of pages, font type, font size, margins, all those kinds of things, right? So when we submit, normally this is just depending on the way that you submit. If it's done on a portal, the portal sort of already picks all of this stuff up or not. And if you submit after the deadline, you don't have the right font size, all that kind of stuff, your application can really go into a virtual digital trash can or a physical trash can. And that's the technical review, right? So your grant application won't even get read. The second part of it is the financial review. So if they're asking for all of those organization financials, maybe your 990s, maybe some other documents, there's a review that happens there. And if you don't pass that review, then we don't, as reviewers, actually get to read your application. So the rules, requirements, regulations of whatever grant you are writing, it's really important to pay attention to those and to be able to adhere to them so that your application actually gets read. And then as a reviewer, we finally get your application. We're able to read it and then to score it according to that funder's particular rubric. This is for the most part, right? And so I want to talk to you about, how do you get to that point of, the technical review? That's pretty easy. Financial review, I'm not going to touch on that today because I'm not an accountant. I'm not a CPA. Not a bookkeeper, I'm not any of those things. I will talk to you just a little bit about the budget and its alignment to narrative, but I want to talk to you in particular about the narrative. And so my goals today are to help you learn how to position your projects for funding and to be really strategic about it, to communicate the impact that you're making on the environment, on the people, pets, and places that your project may impact. And then really developing measurable outcomes and what that looks like as far as the metrics and things that you're capturing, and making sure that the metrics will give you the information that you set as far as the outcomes for that particular project. How to build those project budgets that really align with your narrative, and then just some common pitfalls to avoid. And so what makes a conservation project fundable? Well, funders do not fund your activities. They're not interested in your activities. They are interested in what's the problem that you're trying to solve. And so that makes your problem statement really, really important. The funder may or may not live in your geography, and so they may not have a good sense of how things are in Central Texas, along the Gulf Coast, and the Panhandle. wherever you might be, they could be in a totally different region and not really have that understanding. So it's really important to address the issues that are happening in that problem statement and being really clear about them. Also, they're going to fund your outcomes. So what are the changes that you're looking to make, again, in the people, pets, and places that you are helping to guide those changes, right, by the work that you're doing? How the community is being impacted by this particular project is really important. And then what is the long-term sustainability of the project, of your organization, and how are you conveying that to the funder? So just some ideas. I know you guys would never use anything that is this simplistic in terms of volunteer language, but I just kind of, in a slide presentation, I don't like to fill it with a bunch of, paragraphs and things like that. It makes it hard for us to kind of grasp that concept. But I just want to convey the ideas of maybe some language that might be being used, and how we might need to shift some of that from the language that we have either as volunteers or a small project team to what funder language looks like, and shifting from those activities to some things that funders are interested in. And so some language could be around some simple things like, we planted native species. The funder language may be more along the lines of improving pollinator habitat and biodiversity restoration. It could be around, we removed invasive species, so to something along the lines of protected ecosystem health and improved native species resilience. So many of your chapters already have strong mission alignment with the funder. You have that volunteer capacity, you have the community engagement, and you've demonstrated or can demonstrate that impact. But often what's missing is the clear articulation of how that relates to the funder. So when we find a grant opportunity, it's really important that we read as much as we can about that particular funder, find the things that they're interested in, and relate our project either to their pillars, if they have them, or to their interests. And this can go not just in a grant application, but even for individual donors and things like that. We want to make sure that we align our project with the funder's interest, pillars, or areas of interest. That's something that's really important. We want to convey those measurable outcomes. So things like the number of plants planted is something that is good to put on there, but then tell the funder about how that's going to affect the ecosystem after those plants not only have been planted, but mature. What are the other things that you intend to see from that? And how does that, those outcomes, again, relate back to the funder and the overall project, not just short term, but intermediate and long term. And so those are some of the things that, we want to start to focus on. And then thinking through the strategic framework of your project. So you could be asking a funder for a smaller dollar amount, let's just say like $5,000 for this particular project. But in reality, the project could be a $250,000 project. So even in that smaller project or the ask for this particular funder, we want to be able to relate the larger project. What's going on? How is this going to affect the community, the species of plants or animals, all of those kinds of things. So we don't want to just talk in terms of tasks. We want to talk about what's those bigger outcomes that are happening, and then what are the metrics that we're using that are going to help us really evaluate the impact that we're trying to create. So again, developing that strong problem statement is really, really critical. And funders want to understand what the problem is. And so really clearly articulating that. I'm also going to say here, avoid a lot of extremely scientific jargon. The person who is reading it may not have a science background. Especially for smaller foundations, family foundations, corporate types of things. From the corporate side, they usually try and involve their employees in the grant reviews. They want them to have a sense of what's happening in the community, and all funders do it different, but they will often hire their employees. And let's just say, we'll use an example of a bank. The people reading it from the bank that volunteered to do the, either volunteered or it may be part of their job description. And normally it's just one bullet point in their job description, or it could just be embedded in the other duties as assigned, kind of thing. So they may not be, extremely knowledgeable about your particular project, the environment, conservation, any of those types of things, right? So we don't want to use a lot of scientific jargon that's really going to detract from your project and make it hard for them to read. So that's something that we need to kind of think about. From a foundation standpoint, it could be, if it's a family foundation, some of them use various family members. I've even seen some use as, young as an 18-year-old who is a family member be a part of this review process in preparation for the responsibilities that they were going to take on in that family foundation moving forward. Sometimes they hire out, like, so the example that I gave you where I said, for myself, I applied to be a reviewer. So it could be somebody like myself who decides to do this. And, the environment, conservation, your types of projects might not be something that I am particularly familiar with. It may just be that they hired me because I have an extensive background being a reviewer, not necessarily in your particular field. So we want to make sure that when we're describing the problem, we're bringing it down to a level where somebody could just understand. So we want to think about maybe, what that might look like. Think of, journalists who report on a particular, topic in the news. I think, for the most part, they say 8th grade, 10th grade level. So we want to kind of think about, how that person at that level, 8th grade, 10th grade, is going to read our application and understand those things. Hopefully that makes sense. If you have questions, please throw them in the chat and we'll get to them. The other thing funders want to understand, why does this even matter? Like, make sure that you really convey not just kind of what's happening now, but what are the long-term implications of this problem that we're seeing, and really draw them in. We're trying to get that funder to not just pay for the project, but we want them to invest in what the issue is and the solution, right? And you are offering a solution. So we want to invite them in to be a partner with us. And we want to use that kind of partner language, not make it transactional. And so that's something that is also important to incorporate in there. Who or what is affected? Accurately describe the who and the what to them. Tell them about the population. Tell them what's happening in that environment, in that community. Really be able to clearly articulate, who is being affected by this issue. And then why now? Why is it important? And the other thing I will say, when we're using data and statistics, try and have it as local as possible. And then making sure that that the data is at least from the last 3 years. We want to avoid things that are 5 years plus. If you have to use that, that's okay. I understand that sometimes some things might not be updated, but also talk about what you're seeing in the field if your data is a little further than the 3 years. Also talk about, what y'all are experiencing. And then what happens if nothing changes, right? And we don't want to make it, necessarily big and dramatic. Sometimes it might be big and dramatic, and that's okay. But if there's, we want to accurately convey what are the implications if nobody gets involved, right? And so that's something that is important to help draw those funders into the investment of your project. And so, just a formula for a strong problem statement has things like the current condition, the evidence or data, the community and or environmental impact, and then the consequences of inaction. So when you're writing that problem statement, you can literally list these things out, then start to write your paragraphs there, and then go back, take those titles out, and then just blend it, right? We want to make sure that we're capturing this. So I'm giving you, again, very simple example here of what that transformation might look like. I know you would never write just one sentence like this, but just to kind of give you an idea of what a weak version versus a strong version of that transformation might look like. And so, following that formula, I think will definitely, put you on the right path, help to draw in the reviewer, the reader, and help you with scoring the maximum points there. From this problem statement, and one of the reasons we need it to be so strong is that everything else after it should address the problem and the solution that you're providing in terms of the project that you're requesting funding from. So again, in this, I want to encourage you to use your local data. Use your observations from the field, your own experience, put that in there. But we want it in there too with some strong data from other sources that really back up what we're seeing. You can use county and community statistics if you need to. So if you are reporting something in a particular county and maybe you don't have that data, the census is a great place. I'm trying to think of some other sites. Real estate, school districts, they have a lot of great data. So those are some other places that you can find that. Maybe you have partners that are part of a nonprofit or part of a community group, or some other partnerships that you might have. They might have some findings that they're also seeing, and we want to be able to incorporate that. Or maybe there's been some news articles with some citizens making some complaints. We want to include those too. So those are some things that we can bring into the problem statement that's going to help really clearly define why we're asking for these funds and the request to fund this particular project.
And Arlene, so I think this is important to also ask in our chat. We had someone ask, when talking about data, is it important to have quantitative statistics like hours, number, species count, or include some of the qualitative interest, perspective in people? And I think this was a good question. So
yeah, I think both. We want to do storytelling. So as much as you can, you want to tell the story. So for example, one of the things that we do, if we're dealing with a situation with humans, either the client gives us an actual story. Sometimes they may ask us to change the name of a person, or we just use initials, but we want to kind of get a person that's representative of this, that will be served by this project. So we create a narrative, and I'm just going to use myself as an example. But Arlene may have issues with asthma. Her environment may have a lot of pollution. We're planting some plants to clean up that environment. So we want to weave in the story of Arlene, her health issues, and then talk about our project. Not talk about our project, but talk about the data and statistics of this particular area. So I would say definitely try and do both. If we're talking about, let's say, animals that might be affected, maybe even either give the animal a name, sort of relatable, or, just mentioning the types of animals that may be affected. If we're talking about a plant, like same thing. I think it's really important to draw the reader in through storytelling. So we want to use qualitative and quantitative data. None of us, I think, for the most part, I mean, some of us who are science related aren't as bothered by just reading the numbers, reading the statistics and things like that. But remember, we're not writing for us. We're writing for the reviewer from whatever funder we're requesting funds from. And because they might not have that data, people that are not accustomed to reading that regularly, not familiar, or just have an aversion to it, are going to skim through a lot of that. So we want to make sure that we're doing that storytelling along with the data and statistics. If we do put in some data there. We may even want to then kind of turn the statistics around and describe like what that means. What does it mean when something has increased by 35% or it's greater than the general population or something general in the state of Texas, right? Like in this particular area, it's 75%. The rest of Texas is 15%. They may not understand what that difference means. So let's paint that picture for them so they get a really clear understanding. Thank you for that question. That was a really good one. In terms of aligning your projects with funder priorities, I'm just kind of giving you some ideas here. It's obviously not an all-inclusive list. I don't know what everybody on this call does. But in terms of conservation and biodiversity, some funder priorities might be the activities that you have or the type of project that is native habitat restoration, wildlife protection, pollinator initiatives. Under climate and resistance for a funder's pillar or area of interest, it could be urban heat reduction. We just did a project for planting a bunch of trees under this and with a city entity. Water conservation, reforestation, or drought resilience. Your education and their education and community engagement pillars might translate into projects that you have with youth environmental education. Doesn't even have to be youth, but just environmental education. Maybe community stewardship projects or public outreach that y'all are trying to engage in. Health and quality of life pillars might include some things like outdoor access, green spaces, or nature-based wellness. So these are just some ideas. So again, really reviewing the funders' priorities, areas of interest, looking at their website, thoroughly reading the FAQs if they have those on their website that's with the application. Asking questions just to get some clarification. I think sometimes some funders use some general priority, pillars that, are really, really general. And we may not really understand if our project is a good fit for them. I would say before you start writing anything, normally there is a point of contact on these applications. Reach out to the funder and ask them, in general, would your project fit for health and quality of life? It's okay to do that. Sometimes we get a response, sometimes we don't. I understand that. But to the best of your ability, trying to figure that out. I think this is another great area to use AI. AI can do a lot of data mining that honestly is going to take us a lot longer. So you could put, I'm using examples here. These are not specific to any funder. It's just off the top of my head. But say we want to maybe apply for a grant for Exxon. So we may put in, the website for the particular application and, where it has all of the grant information. We may put some information, ask it, to just kind of look up what projects has Exxon's foundation funded in the past. And that might give us an idea of whether we think our project is in alignment with this particular funder. That's if, you're not getting a response back from the program manager or the grant manager on the funder side, or it's just not really clear from their website, their FAQs, or any of their requirements, restrictions, those kinds of things. So definitely before you engage in spending your time writing a grant to a particular funder that you might not be completely in alignment with, we don't want to waste our time and our resources. We can then move on to the next funder. Some other potential funding sources. There's
Arlene, real quick, I'm sorry. I had another question that I think is really good before you keep going.
Sure.
Continuing the conversation on the storytelling portion, we had a question that said, would you recommend a different strategy for federal and/or state grants with respect to storytelling?
Absolutely. Federal and state, normally, I think you still want to do the storytelling, but they're definitely going to be looking at statistics, if it's federal, that's comparing your geography, your particular project to what is happening on, more of a federal level, then bringing it to state, then bringing it to your community. It could be city, county, it could be a region of a state like Central Texas, something like that. So those applications are definitely going to be looking for that data. I still think that you need to tell a story because there's still a human on the other side of it that wants to be drawn in. Think about when you yourself are scrolling through social media, or you're on a blog or a post, or you're watching television. Like, what draws you in? It's a story, right? Super Bowl ads, right? Something that's going to make us cry or laugh, or something like that. So I think we always want to appeal to that, but definitely any kind of government application is going to ask for a lot more data. In fact, there's normally just sections where that's what you're supposed to be putting in. So definitely we want to have that data. We want to make sure that we're capturing data. That's another really, really important thing. And then, we want to talk about the history. We want to compare it to other data and statistics from outside of this. So yes, that's really, really important. So thank you for that. Are there any other questions before I move on?
Nope.
Okay,
Good. Thank you.
Okay, so in terms of potential funding sources, well, obviously there's, public funding, a little less right now, because of some of the issues with the administration and their focus areas and things like that. But, there is federal, state, local types of funding opportunities. Definitely foundations, they're ones that are interested in environmental issues, family foundations, community foundations, corporate giving, energy companies, utility companies, environmental sustainable initiatives. I think paying attention to the news is a really big opportunity. If there is something happening with a particular company, could be, a railroad company, it could be an oil company, and something negative happens, I would look at 6 to 12 months. There's probably going to be a lot of grant opportunities to invest back into maybe some of the things that happened wrong and a correction. So, paying attention to the news, I think, is another one. For those particular, high wealth individuals that may have their own type of foundation, family foundation, or individual foundation, they are normally, in the news, you see them, they're passionate about something. There's also something called affinity groups. Yes, they do need to improve their PR, Carolyn. You're absolutely right. It just happens. We see that all over. We work with clients all across the nonprofits that work in all different areas in the nonprofit sector. And so, even on small business side, you see a company that maybe had a not so great loan product that they were really pushing for particular demographics. They get caught, they're in the news, and all of a sudden 6 to 12 months later, you'll see a huge investment into that community, those types of businesses. It's on the lending side, it's on the grant side, and then you'll also see it on the technical assistance. So that kind of thing. So I think paying attention to the news is a particular, is a good thing. Looking at corporations that, really value the same things that you do. So I have found grants for our clients, on the back of a Newman's bottle or a Ben and Jerry's, container of ice cream, and, finding out what they are interested in. So I think when you see companies that really promote the environment, organic, those kinds of things, then those are potential funders and opportunities for your particular project. So I think keeping your eye out for some of those things, also understanding who may be doing similar type of work to you. They may not even be in your region. It could be in a total, different region of the US, different state, but looking at who funds them, I think is something that is important, because the geography of that particular funder might not just be in Iowa. They might actually be a national funder. So when you come across others that are maybe doing some of this conservation, environmental work, find out who they're being funded by, and that could potentially be a funder for you. Really quick, back to the affinity groups. So there are some funders, they have meetings, biannual, annual meetings, where they're all interested in this particular issue. And there definitely are some on the environmental and conservation, sustainability types of initiatives. So seeing if you can find, either they happen on a national level, sometimes they happen, locally, regionally, seeing if you can find those particular groups. You may already have a funder who is a part of that. And if you find that they are, sometimes all these affinity groups are different, but I have seen where sometimes they, the members of the group can request that a particular organization come and present to the group, and that gives you exposure to all the other funders who are already interested in your area that you're working in, and then you would get to present in front of all of them. So they all do things different, but just finding those opportunities that align with the work that you're doing is really important. And I think that's going to help you really determine who you should go after funding for and who you should just kind of let move on, along with, there's a lot of other things that come into that. Okay, so that also leads to do not chase every grant opportunity. I know we need the funding, but really it's a waste of your time. I know sometimes when we're in the middle of it, we've got this project, we may be halfway through it, we're missing, some couple of, thousands of dollars of funding to complete it, or we want to take it to the next level, or we want to expand into another geography. And there really is sometimes this feeling of we've got to go after everything. But I want to tell you, in doing this work for 30 years plus, that's not a good strategy. Be very strategic. It is better for you to try and secure additional funds from a funder you have already built a relationship with than to do this as a strategy, right? Yes, it's good to find those new funders and those new opportunities to develop that relationship together, but making sure it's strategic and that it's a match. Don't, ambulance chase, right? Like, don't go after don't try and bend your project to fit this particular funder. So match your project to the right funder, focus really on the alignment. Customize your language to the funder's priority is just really going to give you, a better opportunity to secure those funds. Just be very strategic about it. Grants take time. I know they do, and they can be a pain. It's what we do, and I love it. But for those of you who are doing it out of necessity, I totally get it. Don't, so let's just focus your energy on the areas that we should. And so next thing would be, your outputs versus the outcomes and how you demonstrate that impact. So if we have an activity, say like, pollinator garden installation, the output might be, 5 native gardens were installed. The outcomes should be SMART, so specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, timely. And it might look something, I know they don't have all the numbers in here. It's difficult to put everything on one slide, but increase pollinator, habitat. What does that mean, long term? So a common challenge, I think, with organizations like this is often describing the activities, but not the impact. And again, thinking short-term, intermediate, and long-term. And the time frame associated with short, intermediate, and long is different for every project, right? So it's difficult for me to give you some general kind of things here, but we do want to think about our outcomes in terms of those things and help to paint that picture for the reviewer. For outputs, it's that means what you did. So the examples here, 200 students attended a particular event, 15 acres was restored. So it's going to be numbers, it's going to be, those types of things, hours of volunteers engaged, number of, people in the community who attended this particular event and, helped to plant something, clean something, all those kinds of things. The outcomes, again, as I measured, are, SMART, and they're going to have, that associated with them. The next thing is, building a strong grant budget. So just depending, if the funder gives you a form to fill out for the budget, use their form, even though your budget may look a little different. I have seen sometimes as a reviewer where we have a particular form and they submit what they want to. That is not a good situation. Your grant most likely will get rejected. Okay, so if they do give you a form and your expense items might not necessarily align with the funders, you still need to do it. So in situations like that, we kind of create a different spreadsheet. We color code. We had 5 items, expenses on our budget. It went into this one line item for this particular funder. We do that way in case the funder ever comes back and asks us questions about the budget. If they're reviewing 3 or 4 months later, you've already moved on to other funders, you already moved on in your project, you might not remember what you consolidated from your budget to make it fit their budget. So just keeping track of things like that. They're going to ask for information, or not ask for, but it's going to be part of your budget, personnel, supplies, equipment, travel. But the other part of it is we want to list those numbers because it's required in the form, but then we want to talk about if the budget has a narrative requirement, we want to make sure that we tie those things back to the project. So I'm blanking on like a personnel type of thing. Let's say a project manager. Okay, so we have a line item for the project manager, and we assign a dollar amount. 25% of their time is going to be used on this particular project, and I'm just making numbers up, but let's say 25,000. So when we do the budget narrative, we want to relate what that project manager does on the project that we've described for them. So what are they project managing? Who are they managing? How are they doing it? If we have, let's say, a community outreach coordinator, where are they involved in this process of this project? Is it at the beginning? Is it throughout? Those kinds of things. So we always want to justify everything that is on the budget and how it relates back to this project, not the organization in general, not the chapter in general, but the project that we have that we're requesting funds for in front of this particular funder. So if we're asking for some general operation dollars, again, how does that relate back to the project or to the organization overall, or to the transformation that we're hoping to create in this community or with this particular segment of, species or something like that. So, being very clear in that budget justification. I will also say one of the issues that I see sometimes as a reviewer is we will have read a great narrative and then get to the project budget, and there's things that just don't make sense. Like, for example, one that I can think of off the top of my head was one time they described, this was during COVID, so it was going to be this virtual program that was supposed to happen. But when we got to the budget, they still had things in there like a van, like a rental space, for one of the activities that they were engaged in. But you just told me that this was virtual. So you can tell as a reviewer when a budget has just been slapped on at the end. And I think when we're writing and we're trying to put all of the administrative things together in a grant, we're not thinking about the budget. But I want to encourage you to every once in a while stop or make sure that the budget is in parallel to what you're writing, especially if it's a large project that involves multiple entities. We want to make sure that we're going back to the budget, as everyone is editing, reviewing, making modifications to this grant application. And, maybe the project that we originally envisioned over time as this, grant is going through the process, that, it's changed. And we created the budget 2 or 3 weeks ago. Nobody's looked at it since then. Then we get to the end, it's close to submission, and we go with that budget, but it doesn't align with how that project has evolved over time. So just making sure that, we're able to take a look at the budget. It shouldn't be something that should be done at the last minute. We want to make sure that it is a good, solid budget that matches the project narrative that we described. Okay, some common pitfalls are things like not having a real plan or strategy for pursuing funding. And that's a very reactive way of approaching funding. It can feel very desperate and stressful. And so I would say, before just engaging in grants, stop and really take a look at the work that you're doing, the projects that you have, making sure that they are fundable from what you're seeing from funders, creating thing that help you be ready for those grant applications. And some of those things could be something like a racing matrix. The racing matrix is basically just broken down into the steps of what happens pre-award for the grant application. It's who's responsible, who's accountable, who, I'm blanking on the C right now, it'll come to me. And then the I is informed, right? And so consulted is the C. And so we just want to clearly outline, what are the steps that we're going to take to get this grant over the finish line? Who is responsible, accountable? What did I just say in the C? Just slipped my mind again. I don't know why the C is like I'm dropping it. Consulted and informed. Yes, thank you. Consulted and informed. And we want to make sure that we have this plan in place. That way, when this great opportunity comes out, we decide to pursue it. Everybody's on board. Everybody now knows what their responsibility is. One of the reasons grants feel sometimes so rushed or don't get submitted at all, maybe we started them and we didn't complete it, is because we don't have these roles clearly defined. And we often think somebody else was responsible for doing this and they thought we were responsible, those kinds of things. So working through something like a racing matrix can really help you. Know what you need funding for, and that's part of just like really looking at what you do and not looking at activities, but what are fundable programs that we can put in front of funders and that aligns with funders' areas of interest. Building timelines early. So we always talk about within the company, we work backwards from the deadline, right? And so buffering in enough time with everything else that we have going on, scheduling time in our, in our actual calendars to do the work and have check-ins, especially if the grant writing is a team kind of process. So just building those timelines early, and then have a grant ready folder. So if there are standard documents, maybe some historic language on the organization or the project or what's happening here, have that ahead of time and have it ready to go. You can always cut, crop, add whatever based on the character limits that you have, but having that done, take a look at some of the other areas of the application that are kind of more administrative, not necessarily requiring your brain or input from multiple sources. It could be like the organization chart. It could be some of those other things that are just administrative. Having all of that done ahead of time and then whatever that looks like for your organization, but updating those things on an annual level. So like we have a list for our clients that, you know, involves like board members, you know, the financials for the organization, the metrics that need to be updated at the end of the year. You know, we have those things ready for our clients. And so whatever their fiscal year is, when that changes over, we send them an email like already kind of asking for that information, so we can update it. Do the same thing internally, because it's going to take a lot off of your plate during the actual grant time. Another note, just real quick on grant times, over the last year and a half, we have seen grant times get shorter and shorter. Even for state grants, some of them as short for a state grant, still the same, you know, 75 pages plus for 2 weeks. So I think this is one of the ways in which a lot of funders are reducing the number of applications that they're getting. So what's the phrase? You don't need to get ready if you stay ready. So, you know, you want to put your organization, you know, your chapter in that position to be ready for those opportunities. You could have a really great one come across with a really short deadline. You know, and this is true, everything from government to corporation or foundation, we are seeing those windows get really tight. So having as much as you can already written, thought through, all those kinds of things. We do something internally, and you can do this too. We have a master language document that has a lot more writing than most applications are going to require. And, you know, so then when we get to the applications, it's one of the ways we can be so efficient to write the hundreds of grants that we do a year for our clients, is, you know, have a document like that. Then you cut and paste according to what the funder's question is, right? So we never just cut, paste. We always address the question, and funders are going to phrase those all differently, but just having that kind of standard language for things like organization, you know, history, maybe this particular project or program, because it's long term. We may have some of that language there. There might just be some things that we need to fine tune. So anything that you can do to get ready, I think, is a good thing. A second pitfall would be writing about activities instead of impact. So focus on your outcomes, the community benefit, long-term changes, things like that. Weak data and outcomes is another thing that we see. Also, I think it's a great place to use photos. Sometimes the reader might need a visual. And especially if they're not in this particular area, you don't want to draw that, you know, you don't want them to draw their own conclusions. So let's say that maybe in a garden, you're asking for an irrigation system. You might want to include the plans for that, even though maybe they didn't ask for it. It could be like an attachment that you could put in there. You may want to put the dimensions in, you know, those kinds of things. So help them to, you know, kind of visualize that. If they come out, you know, for a site visit, this would be a great place to just kind of create it on a smaller scale. And I have literally seen, like in this example of an irrigation system, and I thought this was pretty brilliant. They used straws to, you know, kind of draw out what the garden was going to look like. You know, put it on the table when we went for the site visit, because we were funding the site. It's difficult to just go out to a blank field and kind of visualize what that would look like. They created a small scale version and just used plastic straws or something like that. I don't remember exactly what they used, but it was, you know, it was a very good visual representation that really helped us to connect with the project in order to fund it. I would say updating your relevant metrics as well. Track your metrics often. So make sure that there is a standard operating procedure for that. You don't want to get to the point if these particular funds required any type of reporting to do that 6 months down the road or 12 months down the road. Make sure that we have an SOP to keep that. What kind of observations you have and incorporating that into it, and then making sure that your outcomes are tied to your metrics. Another thing would just be using generic proposals. You really can read it. You can read when something is AI generated as well. And I'm not telling you not to use AI. There are really appropriate places to do that. but really going back, reading it, and ensuring that it has your language, your feel to it, that it's not a generic description. So avoid just copy pasting from other applications. I have even in a review, I'm making up the funders again, but let's just say I'm reviewing for Walmart Corporation and I get an application that has Target in it, right? Because they submitted Target application to Target and just copy and paste it, right? So those kinds of things you want to be cautious of. If you can have somebody review the grant for you too and kind of look for some of these things, I think you should. So every proposal should reflect the specific funder, the project, and community impact. And then we talked about this, just being overly technical can really hurt you, just depending on who your reviewers are. So with that, I'm going to ask you again, because I know we've covered a lot. How are you doing? Let me know in the chat with your particular number. Hopefully I didn't put anybody in a number 4 and you didn't go to sleep. So just let us know how you're doing. All right, great. Awesome, thank you. And then just some information on Ascend and the areas that we work in. So we can help, you, your chapter, your organization with organizational readiness, having a strategy, looking for opportunities, writing proposals. We can help with post-award management and any type of consulting. And if you want to get connected with us, you can scan this QR code. We are on all social media platforms. You can visit our website as well. It's going to have all of that information. Every other Friday, we do a LinkedIn Live. Those are free. You are free to attend those and just, kind of learn more information. We also post those on our YouTube channel, which this QR code will get you to YouTube channel free. You can review any of the things that we've had in the past. And with that, I will stop and take any questions.
Thank you so much. If there are any additional questions in the chat, go ahead and add them to the chat if you have any additional questions. I know we took a few of them throughout. I don't believe we missed any. Let me go back up though.
Thank you, Ruth and Susan. I appreciate it.
Arlene, they might all just be reeling still from the intense amount of information that you just shared. Hannah did mention in the chat that you were willing to share your slides, and we can share your slides and the recording obviously on our website afterwards, because I'm still in the, oh wow, that was a lot of information that you crammed into an hour long to really help our chapters advance a lot of their work with partnerships in the future.
Yeah, I think as a presenter, you're always kind of faced with, do I give them too much or too little? And I'm trying to find that space. But I think at least planting the seed in something like this helps you to think about those things. And then, like you said, you can go back, kind of digest it, and then figure out, where I might need to look up some more information, or where's there a gap in terms of what we're doing and what do we need to implement. So I'm glad that most of you found it very informative, helpful. So thank you for that. Happy to do it.
Yeah, we had someone say that they're still taking notes. And for those of you who are note takers, don't worry. Like we mentioned, that the slides will be on our website either later today or tomorrow, as well as the recording. So for anyone who wants to go back and review the wealth of information we just learned about, you will be able to do so. I'm not seeing any additional questions, just a lot of kudos, and we've only got 1 minute left in our hour. So Arlene, just thank you so much again for presenting to our chapters. Oh, we had one. Let's see.
It went away for me. I didn't see it.
I see it. So the question that I think Jane just submitted says, are grant workshops useful if offered by the funding agency? Can an applicant ask for previously successful applications as an example?
Okay, so for the first one, if it's a requirement for the grant to attend the webinar, definitely it's a requirement, so you want to go. If it's not a requirement, I would say you still should attend. While it usually is not general grant writing, it's specific to their particular grant. It is a great opportunity, but go prepared. If they do open it up to questions for you to get your question that you might have, something like, this is my project, does this align with your particular area of interest or pillar? That's a great opportunity to do that. As far as asking for previous applications, it never hurts to ask, but honestly, I've never found that funders actually do it. There are very few funders. I can literally just think of 3 off the top of my head that actually have previously awarded grant applications on their website, like it's an example, but most of them are not going to provide that, but it never hurts to ask.
Perfect. Thank you. And I'm not seeing any additional ones, and we are at time. So just one final thank you for joining us today. I know we appreciate it. I know our chapters greatly appreciate it. And just a reminder, the recording will be on our website on the TMN Tuesday page. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you both so very much. Really appreciate your time today.